Hello and welcome back to Bookish. If you've been following my channel, you know over the last month or so I've been on a bit of a John Dos Passos kick. I'm rereading the USA Trilogy with Jack the Rambling Raconteur as a buddy read, and that's really going great. We're up to 1919 right now, about halfway through, which means we're about halfway through with the USA Trilogy, which this video primarily concerns. I did a brief biographical sketch of Dos Passos, and I talked about Dos Passos, Hemingway, and Dos Passos' wife in a possible literary love triangle. So I've kind of been doing a lot with Dos Passos, and part of that is because in rereading the USA Trilogy, I was kind of looking for a way to talk about Dos Passos and his work, and specifically to talk about these books in the USA Trilogy. So I kind of went back and forth about whether or not I wanted to review each book or do something else. And so what I've decided to do is to talk about the trilogy as a whole, even though we're not finished with the reread, to talk about the trilogy as a whole as a modernist classic, and to kind of highlight the elements of the books in the USA Trilogy which make it a modernist classic. Okay, so when we talk about modern classics here in the United States and probably around the world, you know, that term has kind of an amorphous meaning. You know, exactly when is a modern classic? I've seen videos about this. You know, when I think about modern classics, I think about important or well-regarded or well-reviewed or canonized books perhaps written in the first half to first two-thirds of the 20th century. That's what I would call a modern classic. But there's a difference between just calling something a modern classic, like To Kill a Mockingbird is a modern classic, but then to talk about a modernist classic is something else, because modernism and the modern movement, or the modernist movement in the arts and literature, had distinct features and was a real artistic movement. Maybe beginning with artists like Cézanne and Matisse and Impressionists, and then involving, you know, the emergence, the evolution of Cubism with Picasso and Duchamp and others, and even Surrealism or Dadaism. And the point of this modernist movement in the arts was to kind of challenge the old ideas, old aesthetic ideas about beauty, to challenge the old ideas about proper artistic forms. Well, that naturally branched over into literature and writing and fiction. And we begin to see the emergence of modernist writers like Gertrude Stein or T.S. Eliot, famously James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, or kind of modernist writers who created new techniques, new styles of writing, introduced new topics, covered things that hadn't been covered or were thought to be improper topics covered in literature before, and these inspired Americans like Ezra Pound, and Ernest Hemingway, and William Faulkner, and John Dos Passos. And so John Dos Passos' USA Trilogy, which is kind of his, I guess, most important work, and the thing his reputation hangs on, is in fact a modernist classic. And it's a modernist classic because it attempts to incorporate all those elements of modernism. And it does that by breaking the text up into four separate kind of parts. Now, this isn't like section 1, section 2, section 3, section 4. They're all blended together, and they're blended together to give an impression of the times and of the atmosphere in which the narrative story, which he is writing about, exists. So to deal with the biggest part of the book first, that would be the narrative parts of the book. The narrative parts of the book tell the stories of multiple characters who are working their way through life in modern America around the turn of the 20th century, and then into World War I, and then in the aftermath of World War I. He follows Dos Passos creates and follows lots of characters on their narrative lines, and sometimes the characters intersect, but always the characters are affected by world events that are going on. And in their stories, Dos Passos embraces the ideas of modernism by having his characters engage in premarital and out-of-marital sex. They curse, they drink, they consider things like abortion, they're socialists, they're communists, they're members of labor unions, they're engaged in extramarital affairs. They get up to all kinds of stuff which, you know, before the modernist movement would have been things that really were only hinted at in books and literature, and not, you know, things that were described in any great detail. But modernism kind of broke free from that, and Dos Passos replicates that aspect of modernism in the narrative sections. But in addition to that, there are three other things, elements of the USA Trilogy, which I think are really important and kind of really firmly establish the USA Trilogy as a modernist classic. So the second element I want to talk about are what Dos Passos labels as newsreel sections, and I'll put an example of newsreel, I think it's 30 or 24, yeah, 24, right here. And so what Dos Passos does in the newsreel sections is he tries to give a sense of the time in the United States and the world and events that were going on surrounding the events his characters are participating in, so that you feel like you are immersed in the section. And the newsreel sections contain headlines, they contain kind of bits of newspaper stories, they contain song lyrics, and they're all kind of focused on kind of what's happening in the world at that time. So here in Newsreel 24, I believe the main focus is, World War I and how that's affecting the world and how that's affecting world economy and then individual actions. And so you kind of get this feeling of what's going on in the world and what his characters are going through. You experience kind of the world in which they live, the headlines they might have read. Now, I don't know if those headlines and stories are real or if Dos Passos made them up, but it really doesn't matter because it's part of this immersion of his readers in the world in which he's describing. Importantly, Dos Passos is writing the USA Trilogy in the 1930s and not in the 19-teens and 1920s. So there's that element, and those newsreel things come and they break up the story and they move us from one character to another and they give us that experience of the time. In addition to that, Dos Passos has sections that are called the camera eye. And in the camera eye sections, we get these kind of modernist stream of consciousness, random association, maybe that's a better term, kind of writing in which, unnamed, undefined characters, it's like we're in their mind experiencing what they are experiencing. So I think I put camera eye number 30 over there, and I just thought I would read it to you to give you some idea of what I'm talking about here with stream of consciousness and how that's a modernist element. So the camera eye 30. Remembering the gray crooked fingers, the thick drip of blood off the canvas, the bubbling when the lung cases try to breathe, the muddy scraps of flesh you put in the ambulance alive and haul out dead. Three of us sit in the dry cement fountain of the little garden with the pink walls and resicord. No, there must be some way. They taught us land of the free. Conscience, give me liberty or give me, well, they give us death. A sunny afternoon. Through the faint aftersick of mustard gas, I smell the box, the white roses and the white phlox with crimson eye. Three brown and white striped snails hang with infinite delicacy from a honeysuckle branch overhead. Up in the blue, a sausage balloon gazes down like a tethered cow. There are drunken wasps clinging to the two ripe pears that fall and squash whenever the guns spew their heavy shells that go off rumbling through the sky. With a whir that makes you remember walking in the woods and starting a woodcock, well-to-do country people carefully built the walls in the little back house with a clean scrubbed seat and quarter moon in the door like the back house of an old farm at home, carefully planted the garden and savored the fruit and the flowers, and carefully planned this war. To hell with him, Patrick Henry in khaki submits to short-armed inspection and puts all his pennies in a Liberty loan, or give me, arrive, shrapnel twanging its harps out of tiny powder puff clouds invites us delicately to glory. We happy watching the careful movement of the snails in the afternoon sunlight, talking in low voices about when three men hold together, the kingdoms are less by three. We are happy, talking in low voices in the afternoon sunlight with après la guerre, that our fingers, our blood, our lungs, our flesh, under the dirty khaki, feld-grau blue horizon might go on, sweet and grow, until we fall from the tree, ripe like the two ripe pears, the arrive know, and singing aclad sizzling gas shells, theirs is the power and the glory, or give me death. So, if you are aware of and know information about World War I, and even if you don't, you can feel that this is, in a sense, a moment in time, perhaps, plucked out of an ambulance driver in World War I's experience and the experience between life and death, between the fast-moving pace of war and the slow movement of the snails, the analogy of the two ripe plums falling from the trees to these young men whose lives are in danger, and the ever-presence of death. That is just an incredibly short piece of, I think, really effective modernist writing. So that would be the third type thing. The camera eye sections would be the third type thing. But then, and one of the things I think is most kind of impressive, and one of the best things that exists in the Dos Passos, in the USA Trilogy, which makes it a modernist classic, is that Dos Passos also incorporates biography into his stories. And so within these books, you find embedded these little tiny mini biographies, which I think are really brilliant. And in 1919, there is a mini biography of Theodore Roosevelt, and there's a mini biography of Woodrow Wilson, which I just think are incredibly well done. Each one is only maybe 5, 6, 7 pages long, and they really kind of capture who the person was and what their ideas were and how oftentimes their actions seem to be at odds. So I have The Happy Warrior. The Happy Warrior is an example from is a biography of Teddy Roosevelt, and Mr. Wilson is in a biography of Woodrow Wilson, which just really, I think, as only a leftist could, really eviscerates Wilson for his compromises at the Treaty of Versailles. And the Teddy Roosevelt biography really kind of highlights, I think, the power of the man and the futility perhaps of his struggle and his short-sightedness, and how that didn't quite allow him to achieve the things he wanted, and how ego overcame and oftentimes affected events in his life and his positions. So I just think the USA Trilogy is a pretty brilliant example of modernist literature. And I know not a lot of people know Dos Passos or read Dos Passos, but and I know the idea of reading a trilogy can be somewhat overwhelming, particularly an old modernist trilogy, which does show its age, and does show kind of things that would have been acceptable in the past that may not be today. But you don't have to read the whole USA Trilogy. You just pick up one of the books. You could just pick up the 42nd Parallel and the first, just to get a taste of what I'm talking about. Anyway, there you go. There's my discussion of John Dos Passos' USA Trilogy as a modernist classic. Look forward to your comments in the comment section below. And as always, thank you for watching.